Hello, everyone. Welcome back. A warm welcome from the offices of enmacc here from Munich. It's great to be back. We took a longer break over the summer, not the company, but our webinar series. So it's episode 22 now, and we really want to catch up now with a series of great episodes till the winter. Today would be a awesome reason to discuss gas markets, seeing price jumps again of 20 euros and up. We will step a little bit back, 2 steps back maybe, and understand better what these price jumps do with our minds, our psychology and physiology as a trader, to understand how we can better react to these situations. And I'm very excited to have an excellent guest today with us. He's the authority when it comes to understanding the psychology and physiology of traders, specifically energy traders. He started as a coach to elite athletes in sports and transferred that knowledge to traders who are as well elite, let's say, performers in their way. And I'm sure we can all learn a lot from him, how to deal better with these market situations in a very practical sense, but as well in general, understanding our minds and our bodies, how we can better prepare them for these situations and for our jobs in the daily life. All right, Steve, I'm happy to have you with us. I'm handing over to you and ask the audience to contribute to this discussion as always. So please use the Q&A functionality or the comments, and I will pick up the questions because we want to have first a presentation and then move on to a lively discussion with the audience. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Jens, for the introduction and for the invitation to present today. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. So it's yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting time in the markets. There's obviously, wherever there's activity and action, there is also activity and action in our physiology, in the mind, and both in the body. So we'll try and wrap up with that into the discussion today. What I want to try and do in this short session really is just bring some awareness to you of the role that your body particularly and the brain-body system is playing when you're taking risk, when you're making decisions, and therefore impacting your trading performance, both in the short term, but also I think how that impacts in your performance over the long term. And I want to share some research, share some data, share some case studies, some examples, try and give a few tips and techniques along the way. And obviously then if you've got questions, feel free to ask those in the end. And Jens and I can do that in the Q&A as we move forward. So I want to start here really. This was something I read recently, and I want you to have a little think about this. So think about energy demand on the brain-body system, and think about what that energy demand might be if you were competing in a multi-day chess tournament, and then think about the energy demand of competing in a multi-day bike race or a stage race of some sort. And just see if you can think about, bring to mind maybe how many calories per day might be required for competing in a multi-day chess tournament, and then similarly for the stage race in bike racing, and just see what number comes to mind. And just bear in mind as a benchmark, a typical average male, for example, is probably about 2,500 calories as baseline per day, and a female around about 2,000. So that's sort of the benchmark for normal operation. What do you think? Which one would be highest, I think, is also an interesting question. So this is the answer. It's about 6,000 calories per day for both. So the calorie expenditure of a chess grandmaster in a multi-day tournament is on average 6,000 calories per day, and that is very similar. So you have to average out across the different stage lengths, but it's about 6,000 calories per day if you're competing in the Tour de France. And the Tour de France research has been available for a long time, so that's been measured and monitored for many years. More interestingly now, people are looking at, well, what's the energy demand? What is the calorific consumption when we're competing in cognitive-based activities? And Robert Sapolsky from Stanford did this research. And one thing they found interestingly was some of these grandmaster chess players were actually losing significant amounts of weight during the tournament. So, we're talking about 5, 10, 15 pounds worth of weight over the course of the tournament due to the basically not putting enough energy in based on what was going out. So, and obviously this is a mental activity versus a physical activity. So it's just interesting at this stage just to start to be aware that when we are engaged in cognitive activities, particularly ones that are demanding, there is a calorific, there is an energy demand to that, and it can be pretty high. So just a quick intro about myself. So I've been working with traders as a performance consultant for over 16 years now. February 2005 was my first time I stepped onto a trading floor as a coach. And my role is to help traders, fund managers, and those that support them in the markets as well to perform at their best, predominantly by utilizing psychological and physiological strategies, tools, and techniques and approaches, all bound together really by a deep interest in what does it take to perform at elite levels in the markets. 31 countries I've worked in, thousands of different traders all across the markets, different experience levels, over 150 different trading and investing based firms. So relatively experienced. And what I would say that's interesting around this topic is it's one that I'm getting an increasing demand and interest from. And that may just be down to wearable technology and a general interest in consumers in general and people about what's going on in the body. But I think it's also an increasing awareness of what does it take to be competitive in the markets, above and beyond just your strategies and your skills and your knowledge. What else matters? Psychology is kind of, that's evolved. So that's well known now that psychological states and thinking, cognition, emotion plays a part in our decision making. And now I think that physiology is kind of just coming off the back end of that. And that's what we're going to focus on today. We haven't got a lot of time, so I've had to really think about what not to put in. That was very, very difficult. But here's what we are going to put in. So we'll take some time to think about what role does our body and brain system, so we'll call that the physiology for now, actually play in our decision making and therefore the risk taking. All decisions are risk decisions, by the way. There's always a risk and a reward to all of our decisions. And what's the impact on trading performance? Then we'll start to think about, well, if we believe and if the research shows that there is an impact, how can we go about measuring that? How can we measure and monitor it? And we'll talk about some approaches and I'll share some studies there. And then we'll get into, and now what? So if we want to measure it and monitor it, it's because we want to do something with that, either sustain it or improve it. And I'll talk to you really about 2 or 3 different areas that I think it's really important to be thinking about physiologically, and how we can optimize on a day-to-day basis and how we can train and improve on an ongoing basis. That will be the basic format. So I want to talk about the research now. Not that long ago, the research was relatively small and I could probably have covered that in a few minutes. It's a lot more in-depth now. A lot of research been done over recent years into the role of the brain-body system in decision-making and risk-taking, and actually also specifically with trading and investing participants. So I want to share just a few to give you a flavor of some of the core themes that play out in what you're doing. And the first one I want to touch on, and there's 2 bits of research I'm going to share here, are to do with something called decision fatigue. And there is some debate on this process, but there's some general agreement that when we are making decisions, there is a calorific demand for that. There's a glucose and energy requirement, and the harder and the more risk involved in those decisions, then the higher the number of calories required, so the higher the energy demand is. And so as we're making decisions, and obviously quick, simple decisions have a low energy requirement, and those that are more complex and demanding have a higher energy requirement, but each decision is having a drawdown in fuel availability to the brain. So on the top left there, this was done with parole boards, 1,200 sample cases. They were looking at what factors affect parole board decision-making. Is it the sentence length? Is it the crime? Was it cultural impact? And actually what they found was the biggest variance came about through time of day. So the numerical scale vertically is percentage chance of being paroled. And then we can see the time of day going across. And you can see, and this was a lottery, by the way. So you were allocated a time. So if you got allocated an early morning slot, irrespective of your crime or sentence length, you had a 70% chance of being paroled. But if you came pre-lunch or late in the PM, that chance was down to 10%. So it's a pretty significant variability. And the 2 key factors that were seen as being impactful in this study were rest, so having time to rest and recover between decision-making sections, as it is for the parole board, and glucose availability, so energy. So did the people have a chance to refuel? Further down the line, some similar research has been done with analysts. These were equities analysts in hedge funds and investment firms. And interestingly here, so decision fatigue played out in 2 ways. One, they found that as more decisions were made. There was a reduction in the accuracy of those decisions, which is quite interesting. So kind of a bit in line with what we're seeing with the parole board. But they also found that as they made more decisions and they fatigued as they made each consecutive decision, what they also noticed was a tendency to herd. So there's always safety in the herd. If you're going to put out a decision that's, that's kind of quite unique, then you've got to have a little bit of courage and be quite brave about that to some degree. That there is a risk involved in being different. And so what they found was with the analysts was that they were becoming less accurate as they made each consecutive call. And there was also this tendency to herd towards the kind of the consensus and go for safety. So that's kind of a risk management. So take lower risk in your decisions. And actually, when we look at fatigue, and again, there's good research on this, fatigue does create a bias towards risk aversion, which may not be helpful. Lots of research been done looking at sleep and risk. And one of those pieces of research shows that in the short term, when we're sleep deprived, that it affects our risk perception, and we may focus too much on the reward and we don't focus enough on the risk we're taking to try to achieve that reward. That's some great research done at Duke. Interestingly also, when we're sleep deprived, there's a 60% increase in activation in the parts of the brain which manage our kind of emotional reactions. So we're far more emotionally reactive when we're sleep deprived, and that may play out also in our trading behavior and our decision making. Somatic marker hypothesis, this is Antonio Damasio, looks at the role that the mind and body play and how often our decision making, much as we think it's coming from up here, is also coming from other parts of the body in our wider nervous system, which has three parts: brain, the heart, and the gut, all connected. And that gut feel, which many of you may kind of incorporate in your decision making, it's real, it does play a part, but in the whole body system, the body is informing the brain about risks and rewards often before people can consciously calculate what those risks and rewards are. So it also relates to something called interoception, which is our sixth sense. So we do have six senses, and interoception is the ability of the brain to read signals from the body. So it's a kind of a connectivity. So when we're making decisions, it's a whole brain body system. It's like a quality of the radio signal. Some great research from John Coates. Also interesting, interoception, this brain body reading ability, predicted in this research a P&L that was made. So the highest earning traders had the highest level of interoception, brain-body connectivity, and it also predicted career longevity, pretty interesting. And then other research by John Coates, just to finish off, very interesting, looking at the role of our biology, particularly our hormones and how they impact our risk preferences and decision-making. And John's research found that when traders were making above average gains, then their risk preference shifted to becoming more risk-seeking. That was underpinned by an increase in testosterone, which is our risk-seeking hormone. And when they were making below average returns, then there was a shift to risk aversion, underpinned by an increase in cortisol, the stress hormone. So lots of interesting research, really just showing us that, what we are doing, the risk we're taking, decisions we're making is not just happening up here in the brain. The brain's embodied 2% of your body weight, about 20% of your calorific consumption under normal conditions, more so when we're really applying some cognitive strain to what we're doing. So here's a framework just to be thinking about for yourselves. This is my model that I use with my clients, is when we think about, you as decision makers, as traders, as risk takers, you need a process. So you need a way of engaging with the market. So that's a skill component. There's a strategy component. It's the craft. It's kind of being good at the job. But in all elite environments, being good at the job alone isn't enough. You also need to be able to be consistent and perform well over time, and the role of the mind and the body influence that. So psychology and physiology are also impacting how well you do the craft. And if we dive into the physiology, there are a number of factors within our physiology. What's interesting here is most of these we have controllability over. We can influence them. We can influence health, how well we sleep, our recovery, nutrition, fatigue, breathing. These are things that we can do. So if these are important factors, we can train and develop these, which is why I think it's particularly interesting. Age, of course, we can't. So that's our one factor outside of our control. but obviously we can be, younger or older as such in terms of our biological age, depending on the health of the entire system. So it's good that we know it impacts us, and it's also good to know there are things that we can control and manage so we can train up and improve our physiology and manage it on a day-to-day basis. So let's kind of get into the practice. What do we do? Now we know that it matters and it's pretty impactful. What do we do? 3 key layers of intervention, which I think are important. The first layer is really being aware, which is about measuring and monitoring your physiological state, so you can kind of make some adjustments if required. The second layer is about understanding the need to be ready, physiologically ready to make good decisions on a moment-to-moment basis, like an optimization on a daily basis. And then third, for those who want to go up to higher levels of performance, just recognizing we can train our physiology so we can take it to higher levels, make it more robust, more resilient, learn to manage it in effective ways, dial up our interoception as well, so we can become enhanced decision makers and risk takers through training, should we wish to. So probably in that order, level 1, level 2, level 3, in terms of the commitment required to achieving them, and then also the results and gains that you can get. So the first step is awareness. I talk about this as being physiological analytics. Let's look at what's going on in the body. Historically, and I still do this with my clients now, and very simply, we could do it subjectively. You could do this for yourself now. On a 1 to 10 scale, at this moment in time, what would you rate as your level of stress? 10 is high, 1 is low. Do the same for energy, 1 to 10. What would your rating be at this moment in time? Likewise for mood, 1 to 10, where would you be? We can take a quick snapshot very quickly, subjectively. We might want to go broader. What might it be over, on average, perhaps, over the last week or so? 7 to 10 days, maybe. Get a bit of a longer baseline. Subjective is subjective, that is the downside, but the research shows that when it's done consistently, people's ability to calibrate, to really find the nuances between maybe the 6 and the 7 or the 6 and the 6.5, really improves through practice. So it is still an effective strategy, and actually even many modern day apps that are kind of wearables still require us to input subjective scores. But if we want to go more objective, get into the data, the beauty is we can use wearables, general kind of day-to-day wearables, or we can go the next level beyond and actually engage in some deeper analytics, which could become from, there are some apps. One that I like is Elite HRV. You take a daily reading, it's 3 minutes, does like a bit of a scan and a check of the body, gives you a score. You can then see that on a day-to-day basis, or we can start getting 24/7 data as well. So lots we can do. But we do want to be doing something to measure and assess. And then, as we've got here, this is a case study of a hedge fund trader, we can start to see what's going on in the body. And just very simply here, because of time, red bars going across are stress, blue is physical activity, and actually these 2 blue doses here at each end of the day, that's actually the commute. He's actually riding his bike to work and home again. And then the green is recovery, and we can see the height of the bar shows the strength of the response. So we can see how much stress was there and how strong was the stress, how much activity was there and how strong was the intensity, how much recovery was there and how strong was that recovery, what was the quality like. And so we can see here there's 11 hours for the working day. It's pretty much red all through the day, not a lot of recovery. We have got activity, the kind of bookmarking both ends, which is good, but we can see the sleep period, 7 hours, 45 minutes long, predominantly red. The body's not switched into recovery mode. There's a bit of recovery later on, just at the end of the sleep period, but that's not going to be a great state to carry into the next trading day. So, but when we see the data, what I find is the data becomes engaging for people to perhaps make some changes. So this is the beauty for me of the measuring and the monitoring in a more objective fashion. Let's get some insights to create action. So you can be thinking about, if you're already measuring or monitoring and what you might want to do differently, but I think that's the starting point. But for me, we want to measure and monitor for a reason. And for me, the fundamental reason is this idea of readiness, that we on a day-to-day basis are conditioning our physiology to give ourselves the best chance of making good decisions, or following and executing the process as effectively as is possible. So what we've got here is 2 different traders, trader A, trader B. And again, it's same data as before. So red is stress, blue is physical activity, green is recovery. And we can look and see the difference in experience within the body that these two different traders have had. Trader A, 11-hour 46 working day, so pretty long, managed to get out for a little bit of activity there about 10:30. We can notice the sleep period is short, only 5 hours 40 minutes, and the first part of that sleep period is still in the red zone. If you're working long and hard all day, the body doesn't just switch off, it needs to unwind, and that's what's happening there. In contrast, trader B, we can see before the sleep period, which is longer, 8 hours, but we can see there's some recovery there before the sleep period as well. So the body is unwinding before sleeping and then goes into obviously what looks like very easily a much better night of sleep. So 2 very different days, and how those traders feel physiologically the next day will be different because the day they've had before was different and the sleep and recovery has been different. When you're sleep deprived, what you'll find actually is our sleep is regulated by our cortisol levels, by our stress hormone. And if you're not sleeping well, that becomes disturbed. And if you're stressed, it disturbs your sleep quality. So stress and sleep are very strongly correlated. And the fundamental goal physiologically, above all else, is to sleep well, long and well, 7 to 8 hours for most people of good quality sleep. And the 5 areas to be thinking about around optimizing your physiology are stress, so how you manage that stress during the day, sleeping well, getting recovery during the day, so not just from nighttime recovery, but also daytime recovery, physical activity, which is obviously very good for our system, and also then how we utilize nutrition for energy and fuel during the course of the day. So we're looking to optimize on that daily basis. Alongside that, something, and this is important more so for longevity, for sustainable high performance, is we want to be looking at the balance of stress and recovery on an ongoing basis. So if there's too much stress, not enough recovery, things break down. Muscles break down, body breaks down. That's where you'll get the colds, the sniffs, the flus, and so on. If we get the stress recovery balance right, it's sustainable, ongoing, but actually if you get a stress recovery balance right, the body also strengthens, becomes stronger, becomes more robust and resilient. So we can see here 3 days of data in each set of graphs, and then the black line is measuring resources, basically energy resources, over the course of the 3 days. And we can see that at the top there, for that trader, it's declining over the 3 days. And actually, it continued to decline all the way through Thursday and into Friday. Whereas at the bottom, we can see this, what we call oscillation, this balancing of stress and recovery, which is far more optimal and sustainable. So, trading often is a stressful and challenging job. And so we have to work with that. And the antidote to stress is recovery. So the goal is to get really good at recovery. That's the fundamental aim. So a couple of insights into stress and recovery I think you'll find useful. This was a 3-day period where a trader during a very busy market period was normally working 10 hours to 11 hours per day. Very busy market period, 3 days in a row where he upped his intensity to 14 hours per day. HRV is heart rate variability. It's a measure, a physiological measure of kind of the state of the body. The higher the number, the better. It's very individual and contextual, but just for basics, high is good, low is not so good. And so we can see on day 1, it's 53. He does his 14-hour day on day 2. It drops down to 45. And that's a relatively small change, but useful to be aware of. But look at what happens on day 3. It's now basically dropped to 50% of the day 1 number. That's a huge shift. And that's the impact of stress and fatigue on the body shown objectively. And that's a very different state to now be making decisions from and taking risks from. And the beauty of it is if you know that, you can manage it on that day. So this is a morning reading. So knowing you're 26 allows you to now measure, to manage that number during the course of the day, either by shifting you or by shifting how you engage with the markets. One of the challenging strategies that people might use for switching off is sometimes they will use alcohol for recovery to kind of unwind. Alcohol is a sedative, so it will make you feel relaxed, but it also is a sedative. So when you're sedated, you're not sleeping. So alcohol before bed might make you feel sleepy. You might fall asleep quicker, but you're not actually sleeping. You're in that state of sedation, and we see that in the data. But this is just an interesting chart to show what happens to your how much recovery you get at night, which is the vertical scale, versus against alcohol portions going across. So you can see that basically the more alcohol you drink, the less nighttime recovery you get. And as a general rule of thumb, this is just very general but useful, 1 unit of alcohol is costing you roughly 1 hour of sleep recovery. So just a very neat rule of thumb to bear in mind. So we're not saying don't drink, just be mindful of the impact, because if you're not sleeping well, it affects risk perception, it affects your emotional reactivity, how you process information, and everything else pretty much within the body. And then finally, this was just an interesting study when we were doing some research with a trading group, and one of the traders had been through a very busy sort of 3-month period and decided to take a break. And he said, I'm going to take a break. I'm pretty exhausted. I need to get away from the markets for a few days. All good in intention. Went away skiing for 3 days. And so what we can see here is we can see 3 days of skiing, an average of 6 hours sleep per night, 63 units of alcohol, which is for anybody's standards, that's pretty high, I would argue. And we can see that the heart rate variability drops from 61. So this is already low, so it was higher in the 70s, drops down to 60 over the stressful trading period, wants to go away and recover and recharge, goes skiing, physically active, strain on the body, doesn't sleep well, strain on the body, drinks a lot, strain on the body. HRV is now 17 points lower at the end of the holiday than it was at the start of the holiday, which was lower than the start of the busy period. So a good break, enjoyable break, good to connect with people, social recovery, but that's not recovery on the body. So we do need to think about those green bars is the body is slowing down, and we want to get that balance right. And then, I think what's interesting for some of my clients now is this is all good and interesting, Steve, but what does it mean in terms of actual results? So this was some research done with a trading group, relatively short-term timeframe traders, some pretty high frequency, but that's good for data capture. And again, this is just for interest, but the green, red, and yellow states are basically green is the person's HRV number. So their kind of physical state is good within their kind of normal boundaries and optimized, all good. That yellow state might come from maybe, a 10-point drop, depending on the individual, but it means things have shifted. There's definitely a bit more stress or fatigue in the body. There's a bit more strain that's happened. Be aware, manage as needed. And then red is there's been a big drop, for that trader before from 53 to 26, that would be a red day. And then we want to be a bit more thoughtful about what we do during that day, if we can. What we can see is, well, what does it mean in terms of performance? Well, we can see that the P&Ls are different. I'm not going to draw any strong conclusions that this is meaningful P&L wise, because there's too many other factors involved, but it is interesting. They made less money on the days when they were in a red state. What I think is definitely has more causality is that they traded less. So their intensity of trading was lower when they were stressed and fatigued. And that's a much stronger narrative to probably bring some truth to, perhaps, than just a causality between stress, fatigue, and the P&L. So, but again, it's interesting to see there were shifts in results and in metrics as a result of the shift in the physiology, which is quite important. And then just the final of the 3 stages, really, which again I'm going to go through pretty quickly, is it's important to recognize that we can train our physiology. So we can optimize it day to day, sleep well, eat well, nutrition, recovery, activity, and so on. But there are certain practices and certain elements that we can actually consciously and intentionally train to improve our physiology so that we can be more resilient to stress and fatigue, and we can enhance our interoception, so we can improve our emotional regulation, our stress regulation, the mind-body connectivity, and our decision-making, our risk-taking. And there are 3 core areas that are trainable. The first one is this ability to recognize our state. So before you can manage your state, you need to be able to recognize what state am I in. So when we did those 1 to 10s, if you're good, if you've got a good mind-body awareness, you'll be able to pretty accurately give yourself a score. If that awareness is lower, then your accuracy will be lower, and that's a measurable factor. So we can assess how good somebody's mind-body awareness is by testing that, and the higher, the better. That's John Coates's research around interoception. Things like mindfulness, meditation, breath work strategies, anything like yoga, Pilates, all of these activities where you're engaged in really monitoring what's going on in the body carefully can train that ability. Then we can regulate. So there will be times when your stress response in your body is high and maybe unhelpful, or that it's too low and unhelpful. And it's possible, typically through breath work, that we can learn and train specific breathing approaches to upregulate, to energize, or to downregulate, to put the brakes on and calm the system down. And the science of breathing is growing and becoming more refined in its approach. So there's lots of interesting work being done there. And then reinforcing is about, regularly training your physiology so you get, like a day-to-day basis, like going to the gym, doing a fitness program to be physically fit. We can do the same in our physiology to be physiologically fit and robust in our system. And at the bottom here is an example of this. This was a 6-week training program using a particular breathing strategy, 10 minutes a day for 6 weeks. We had about 19 traders in the study. And then the lighter color is the pre, the darker color is the post, and then the scale is percentage of people having that feeling most of the time. So we had about 42% who were feeling tired most of the time. And that went down to obviously about 7% or so. We can see anxiety down, anger down, frustration down, relaxation, motivation up, and so on. Stress levels that were clinically measured, a big drop down in those. And that's just the benefit of doing this regular ongoing training. So, again, very verifiable and measurable, which is good. This is an example. This was a great one to show today because this was one of my clients who is very physiologically focused. In fact, he's very performance focused. He's got a great process. He's an energy trader, works for an energy company, very focused on performing and trading and being the best he can be. Does a lot of work on his process and his skills and his knowledge and his strategy, equally works on his psychology, equally works on his physiology. We can see here, there's some physical activity. There's some green bars about 9:30 to 10 o'clock where he's getting some recovery during the day. Wind down in the evening, great night of sleep in there. That is a physiology which is optimized. That is a good high level physiology, increasing his chances of making good decisions and trading well. And some really good stats there that we can see. And that's available to all of you. So there's no barriers to entry in your data looking like that. It's just whether you're willing to do the work and spend the time and have got the inclination, obviously, to do what needs to be done. So, but many people, who are kind of getting more into this now, and having it measurable, this is what we can kind of see on the other side. So also, to complete the narrative in I guess a happy ending, is also a very high performer. So I'd encourage you to think about what you are doing already, and then what you could be doing to enhance your own physiology and your decision making and risk taking. And again, just think about how am I maintaining that awareness? What can I do to be ready on a day-to-day basis, just to kind of optimize my physiology so that I can make good decisions if I need to? And then for those of you at the higher levels or want to get to those higher levels, then think about meditation, mindfulness, breath work. These types of techniques are ways that we can start to really train up our physiology and enhance our decision making and risk taking at higher levels. So that's a pretty quick run through of what probably could be a 25-hour presentation in about 25 minutes. So thanks for bearing with me. I did probably talk pretty quickly, but obviously we can do the Q&A now, Jens, and people can pick up on things if whatever's useful for them.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Steve. I found it already super interesting to make us aware of all these aspects here, and showing as well the link to results. I will pick up already some questions we got here during your presentation. One is a little bit on causality. You said if someone is stressed, he's sleep deprived and has no recovery results are worse. Do you see the opposite as well? If the results are not good, how does the body react to that? Can you get out of this potential downward spiral of, being down, having bad results, getting worse?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors at play. What I would just say in terms of the causality is currently, if I had to put any level of confidence in it, I'd be relatively confident if somebody was in a bad state, that the risk of making a bad decision increases, and therefore the chance of getting worse results increases. I think it's harder at the moment with what we've got to say that if you're in a green state, for example, that you should maybe take more risk or there's more chance of making a good decision. There is, but I think the data isn't as strong. But from all the studies we've done, definitely people, when they get into those very lower levels of physical states, it plays out in unhelpful ways the majority of the time. So and in fact, even doing that, if we can manage that and reduce getting ourselves into bad trades, putting bad risk into the market, making bad decisions, if you can cut out half of that, that can be significant for some people. So I think that's a great starting point anyway. Then the question is, right, once we're in that kind of red zone, what do we do to improve it? And we've got to look at, why are we in it? So this is where we've got to look back. If my state has changed from say 53 to 45 down to 26, we've got to look at, well, what's the story behind that? If I was working longer and harder, then obviously the solution in the short term might be I need to work less long or less hard if I can. Or I might want to have some tools or techniques whereby if I'm working longer and harder, for example, recognize that exercise is a stress, particularly intensive exercise, and I might dial down my exercise levels. So I'm reducing the strain from exercise and I spend more time maybe sleeping or recovering, doing things at a lower level to try and get the stress recovery balance right in the short term. There are also particular breathing protocols that people can engage in that can restore, recharge, and re-energize, that can be used during the day or in the evening, so we can kind of buffer up the quality of the recovery. But I think it's understanding that, not looking at the data alone, but looking at the data and then looking at what's happening underneath the data. If it's just that I'm performing badly and now it's a psychological stress, then there's other things we might need to do other than just doing breath work, because breath work will make your body feel better. But if you're trading badly and getting bad results, it won't fix that. So you've got to kind of really look at the complete picture.
Excellent. I mean, we get here, I think, two areas of questions here, which are really of interest. One is what you said, what can you do within this situation if you recognize I'm getting now in a red zone, and many participants ask actually here about breathing techniques or meditation you can do in the moment.
Yeah.
Is there any recommendation you can have?
Yep. Well, what I'll say first of all is the goal is to not get into the red zone. So what we want to recognize is the fundamental goal is to reduce the number of times we get into that red state. And that's where the optimization and the training really helps. And if we do get into red, that we're kind of dipping into it and we're not diving deep down into it, because the deeper we go, the harder it is to get out. So this is why the ongoing monitoring is really important, because you can catch from green to orange. And if you know this upcoming day is going to be equally challenging, then it potentially can go from orange to red. But if you do in the course of the day, for example, build in some recovery breaks. So for breath work, essentially, the simplest way to think about breathing is this. You've got two parts to the breath, the in-breath and the out-breath, and they are connected to two different parts of the nervous system. When we breathe in, if you take a deep in-breath, what happens is you'll notice your heartbeat speeds up. There's an acceleration in the body. That's the sympathetic nervous system. It's our kind of fight or flight energizing response. When we breathe out, any of you who smoke will know this, but also those of you that have ever, that sigh a lot, you'll notice that things slow down. So the in-breath is the accelerator, the out-breath is the brake, the decelerator. So when we're getting into moments of higher stress, essentially in our body, the energy levels are going up. What we need to do is bring those levels down. So the simplest way of doing that is to make sure that if we do some breath work, that we're taking long, slow out breaths. That's what I mean. The sigh is the body's natural response to stress. A long, slow out breath to exhale to put the brakes on. So we could do a number of controlled sighs essentially in a row. If you want to, if you're a bit more, if you're technical and you want a specific way, then what we can do is when we're breathing, we have what we call the cadence, and the cadence is the rhythm. So for a slowing down of the system, we might breathe in and out at a ratio of 1 to 2. So the out breath being twice as long as the in breath. The starting point for that would be 3 seconds in, 6 seconds out. So essentially you go in for 3, out for 6, in for 3, out for 6, and we're kind of down trending. And that's called down regulation, putting the brakes on. Once you get comfortable at 3-6, you could do 4-8, 5-10. So the ratio stays the same. We're just changing the length of the breaths as we become more efficient. You could even get to 6-12 if you get really good at it. And you could do that in the moment, or you could do that in batches of moments. Could be a minute at a time, 2 or 3 minutes at a time during the course of the day to kind of recharge and refresh. If you're low in energy, then we do a longer in breath and a shorter out breath. So we could go 6 in, 3 out, 6 in, 3 out, and now we're uptrending. But it allows us the ability to manage our state through the one thing that we can control in the nervous system consciously, which is the breath.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that. So for me, that works in some situations quite well. I mean, for a trader, I'm making it a little bit extreme now, but if you're saying someone is in the red zone, you basically would recommend someone to scale back his trading activity, don't you? Can you do that as well in the workplace? And what are your recommendations as well, maybe to the managers of a team?
It's a consideration. I wouldn't, again, with all this, because the data, this is all relatively new still, and it's getting more refined and the quality is improving. So I wouldn't jump to that decision because somebody went red. I'd want to understand what was going on in the body. So again, it's really important to look at why what is happening around that. And did it go green, 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 and then jump to red, or was it kind of green, green, orange, 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 red, red? So kind of what's the time frame is important. So you've got to look at the data carefully. But it's another layer of information into, and now how do I approach this day? So if I've not been trading well and my mood is low and my physiology is low, then I can make an assessment on, as I approach this day, do I want to make some adjustments to what I trade, how I trade it, the risk that I take? And likewise, and this would be a layer above that, if you are managing traders and you had access to that data, would you want to maybe, when people went into orange and then perhaps into red, would they be people that maybe you'd have a conversation with and just check in? How are things? I've noticed this. How are you feeling? Because we're not saying that there's a, that if you are in red, you can't make money, or you couldn't make a good decision. It's just about what's, the chances. What are the probabilities of making a good decision versus a bad decision based on physiology as one of those factors that we could be assessing. So I think you've got to be quite nuanced and careful with it, but I think it's an area that more and more of my clients are becoming interested in and are looking at measuring and assessing amongst other metrics against other analytics. So it's just an extra layer for consideration.
But that brings as well up the aspect that it's not just about individual well-being or stress levels. It's actually an issue for the whole team, which you can manage as well within the team. Or you could turn around saying, as a manager of a trading front office, it's your job to control that, isn't it?
I wouldn't want to get into whether whose responsibility is or who controls it, because there's a lot of debate at the moment about what data is shared, why is it shared, who sees it, what are they seeing, what do they do with it, and what's the consequences. If I, for example, saw my data and let's say it was red, and then that day, for whatever reason I made a decision and that trade cost me money, am I now then culpable because I traded in the red state and I didn't sleep well last night and I had 2 units of alcohol, and so it's kind of, so there's a lot of that area that needs to be refined and understood and agreed. But yeah, I think in general at the well-being level, then I think strong performance cultures in trading and investing want to look after their people, look after their traders and their PMs and their analysts, and they want them to have sustainable careers and not to burn out or get exhausted or fatigued or to suffer with high levels of stress unnecessarily. And so A couple of my big clients at the moment, much as they're curious about this as a performance in the moment factor, as a decision-making and risk-taking factor, they're equally as interested. And in fact, one of the clients is more so interested in how do we manage the physiological well-being of our traders and PMs so that they can, perform at their best, but also so they can have, be healthy and well and enjoy life outside of their working life and have a sustained career. And not have to feel that, I do this for 5, 10, 15 years and then, I have to retire. So I think that sustainable health and well-being is a key factor, particularly obviously in the context of the modern era where we're at now with mental health and physical health, being prominent for most people. And so it's a way that we can dip into that in objective ways and, both individually and in teams and in organizations for sure.
I think we have all looked with quite some fascination on your graphs with the red and the green lines. And we got some questions here, sorting that a little bit, or everyone sees his own daily routines in there. When I'm coming home, I have 3 kids. Sometimes the stress level really goes up. So it's not that recovery comes automatically when leaving the job. There were quite some questions. When does it really start? Is Netflix, gaming, listening to music, is that already active recovery, or can it further contribute to the?
Yeah. So I can answer this with pretty clearly because we've got the data. So obviously I've had hundreds of traders hooked up, and during those, we normally do 3 to 5 days at a time. And of course, as much as we get their trading periods of their day, we see what they're doing outside of trading, and we see the impact on their body. Now, interestingly, in the broad population, where we've got hundreds of thousands of sample of data, Saturday is the most stressful day of the week on the body out of all 7 across the biggest population, because people are getting stuff done, they're catching up, they're running around doing things, they might be engaging in high levels of sporting activity, they're often going to bed later, they're eating later, they're drinking more, so the strain on the body is highest on a Saturday than any other day in the week across the broad population. Likewise also, therefore, within the trading population. So what we've got to think about is stimulation. So you're either stimulating, so you're engaging in energy, or we're unwinding. That's why the skiing holiday, I show that because it's not recovery, because skiing is an activity where you're engaging physically, so it's an energy in system. So when you think about things like gaming, for example, it depends on what game you're playing and how you're playing it. Is it a competition? Is it high level, low level? Whilst it can be an unwind, a switching off from the markets, what's it doing in the body? If it's engaging and stimulating you, it's not going to be recovery, and the bars will be red. I've got data of people watching their favorite sports teams when they're losing. It's lots of red bars. We've got people watching horror films, red bars, stressful on the body, some of it quite highly stressful. So it will be individual response based on the person and the exact nature of what they're watching. TV, low level TV watching, kind of what I would call kind of mindless TV, not too much thought, for many people is green. But if it's kind of really intense, it might be some green with some red. With our kids, I've got kids. I love my children, but there are times when it is demanding, energy demanding, and there's a strain to that, much as it's enjoyable overall. But at the moment, it's taking energy out of my system. So those bars may, even though I'm even enjoying it, they may still be red because we're energized, it's a strain, and it's not recovery. And that's why we've got to really think about this, and exercise is the key one. People often exercise to kind of unwind and switch off. But if you're doing aerobic exercise and it's intense, or working out hard in the gym, it's a stress to the system. So it's red bars plus blue bars is our strain versus green. And it's really about, am I getting enough green to balance all of the red and the blue? And typically the number at the moment is we need about 30 to 35% of our day. This is normal people under normal conditions. So traders are not normal and the conditions are not normal, but normal people, normal conditions, 30 to 35% of the day should be in that green zone, which if you're sleeping 7 to 8 hours and you're sleeping well, will give you the bulk of that. And then a few top-ups during the day. But then of course, as intensity increases, it becomes harder then to get that recovery. So we've always got to be looking at the whole 24/7 picture and across the 7 days, because it might be that Monday to Friday, it's hard to get the balance right. So we've got to work harder at the weekends or when we take our vacations to get that recovery balance over longer timeframes more effective. So it's not easy, and sometimes it can't be ideal. So we're looking to optimize and get as close as we possibly can for the individual within their unique set of conditions.
Excellent. Let's get very practical to the end here now. You said it starts with measuring. If someone gets the app, you mentioned one.
There are many. So 2 good ones if you want a choice. Elite HRV. It's an app. You wear a heart rate monitor, Bluetooth. You put it on in the morning. Take a 3-minute reading. It tracks your physiology. Then it works out your baseline score, and then day to day it tells you whether you're kind of higher or lower. It gives you the number, but also whether you're higher or lower. Red, green, amber. You can input some data about your sleep and activity and other factors, and it kind of graphs all that as well for you. Very quick, very simple. It's a great starting point. iThlete, so like athlete, but with an I, is another one that's very comparable to Elite HRV. They're 2 good ones to look at.
We're basically picking up the data, and then we take your book. And can we directly start, or what would you recommend how to approach the topic?
Simple. If you want to get into it objectively, just download the app or an app that does that measurement. Get your heart rate monitor. Get a good quality one. You want a good quality Bluetooth monitor. It's going to cost you £50 plus to get one that's good enough. If you get lower quality, you get lower quality data, and we're talking heart rate variability, which we use is milliseconds. So if you're slightly inaccurate, it makes a big difference when you put it through the algorithm. So it's 50 quid for the heart rate monitor on average. It's a few quid a month for most of these apps, and then you're underway. And then, the apps nowadays have got all the information. They can tell you more. If you want to find out stuff specifically about trading, obviously we've covered some today. Bulletproof Trader, the book's got some physiology stuff in there, which would be useful as well. But you can really just go into it with a curious mind and as an experiment, and hook yourself up and be curious about, well, what are my numbers? Why was it higher? Why was it lower? What did I do differently? Start there. And, for the first few months, just literally have a curious experimentation about how the markets and your trading impacts your body, and then start looking at how the state of your body impacts how you engage with the market, and do that experiment for a number of months. Record some information, write a few things down, and then you'll start to see what helps you and what gets in your way, and then you can find some things maybe to refine and go, okay, these are some areas that I need to do more of or do less of, some things to start doing, some things to stop doing. Pick 1 or 2, put them into practice, keep measuring the data, look at the impact. As you roll through, pick 1 or 2 more things, and then keep going and keep going. So it's so easy. The beauty now is accessibility. These apps, the devices, they're accessible, they're relatively cheap, even wearables now. Off the wrist, by the way, not as reliable as the chest. That's the downside, but they'll be consistently inaccurate, if that makes sense. So as long as you wear the same wearable, the data won't be as accurate as from here, but it'll be inaccurate each day, so that the changes will still be useful to measure.
Excellent. We need to come to an end. I think we could continue for quite a while. We have still some questions unanswered, which we will try to pick up via email. I recommended your books, Bulletproof Trader, one of them. I think a really super interesting read for all of us. So I can definitely recommend that. And get in contact with you or us and follow up on the discussion. We as enmacc will be back in the next weeks with discussions around the markets. We'll have some experts from our friends of Refinitiv here to discuss gas and power markets a little bit closer to the daily challenges we see. But I think it was definitely worthwhile listening to you today and getting this wider perspective on our jobs and how we can perform better. Thanks a lot, Steve. Thanks to everyone in the audience. It was great to have so many back, more than 200 participants. Really great feedback. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.